Here we are at Speaker's Corner. Let's hope it doesn't demand that we reconnect every few seconds. I want to hand it over to Ash here. And he's going to have the camera, is that right? That's it. That's it. Just mind this.
Oh, does it tell you when you're going to give it to?
Here we go. Your questions are very appetite, so do carry on. What were you saying?
Yeah, so I was wondering, why don't you support Starmer? What is it about him you disagree with?
Well, obviously, in the leadership election, I didn't support him.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll support him in the sense that I'll support the Labour Party getting elected, but I don't agree with his methodology, his analysis, his programme, his policy. So that's a reasonable grounds for saying I don't support him. Let's move a little bit because he's going to come and scream hellfire at us. Right here. That'll do. Well, it's going to follow them around, isn't it? That's the thing. They follow them around. That's cost them quite a bit of money to run those things. I think so, yeah.
Give a specific example. Like, where has Starmer messed up? Like, where?
Well, I think, to be honest, although I saw there was a report on why the Labour Party lost, which I haven't read, but I'm sure it's full of nonsense. And to be honest with you, I think the main reason they lost was because Jeremy Corbyn, from 2015 onwards, was consistently sabotaged by the Labour Party parliamentary party, including by Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer, at the very end, I think he was the key figure in undermining Corbyn, because he promoted this absurd position on Brexit, which I think was responsible for, I mean, above all else, was responsible for losing the last election. That's what I think. And in 2017, we didn't have that scenario. Corbyn, to be fair, they didn't openly sabotage him in the election campaign itself, but they did sabotage him in the election. I remember, because I'm on the press list of the Labour Party. Sometimes I was, depending on who was purging people from the list. And during the whole of the election campaign in 2017, I was only sent 3 dates when Corbyn was speaking. When I got those dates, I posted them on Facebook, and everybody said, "Is this really going ahead?" Because the only source for this rally, the only source saying there is a rally with Corbyn, is Heiko Khoo. So how come is it that Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, is addressing rallies on the last day of the campaign and nobody knows the rally's taking place? And it was because Central Office had a load of people trying to sabotage Jeremy Corbyn. And it was revealed, by the way, that they would even feed adverts to the Corbyn team. So they thought the adverts were going out promoting Corbyn, whereas actually they were only aimed at the Corbyn team. They picked them specifically to feed them these adverts, to make them think they were campaigning when actually they were sabotaging. And that's why I question your analysis, which is effectively, it's not because I'm not condemning you for that, but it's effectively a repetition of what the Labour leadership politicians, what I would call the right wing of the Labour Party, but they like to call themselves something else, and their cohort in the media, what they say is, you have to get elected to bring about change. That's not the history of socialism. The whole history of socialism is a history of struggle. Firstly, outside of Parliament. Secondly, manifesting itself thereafter when you build an extra parliamentary movement with power and influence, shape the ideas, movement and programme of the masses, then you can have parliamentary representation. A parliamentary representation, don't forget, is a poison chalice, because Parliament is an institution of 600 MPs. Those 600 MPs are integrated together within a system that has been developed by conservatism, with a small c, for over 1,000 years. and or nearly 1,000 years. And therefore the idea that Parliament is the central instrument of change is totally false. You could pass half a dozen progressive laws in Parliament and they will be tied up, strangled and expelled by the legal structure of capitalism. You could create all sorts of laws to transfer wealth and power from the City of London and big business. And you will discover, if you get elected, like if Corbyn would have been elected in December last year, then what would have happened is a campaign by big business to sabotage the Labour Party. Now, they don't do that now. You know what they said? Remember they said, oh, the money tree. And then they said, no, with Jeremy Corbyn, it's a money forest. Ha ha ha. And all the newspapers were there. Money forest, money tree, money madness, money grows on trees. People even told me a couple of days before the election, I was in a Greek restaurant. And this woman, she turned and said, well, she goes, Jeremy Corbyn, as far as Jeremy Corbyn's concerned, we can have any player we like for Arsenal. Right? And that was the idea. Jeremy Corbyn's just inventing a money tree to throw money around. Well, now, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the British government is throwing much more money around than Jeremy Corbyn ever said he would. The difference is this. 2/3 of the money that's been chucked around now by the Conservative Party and the government is aimed at big business. They're getting the money. That's why they're not screaming and shouting, hell, blue murder, save us from death, right? You know, all these big businesses, Selfridges and so on, they've been shut for months. Firstly, notice this, the Financial Times today, look in the headlines there. It says, Wednesday this week is crunch day for the landowners. Why? Because all the big businesses are only going to pay 10% of their rent. Now imagine the tenants did that in Britain. Oh, we're only going to pay 10% of our rent. You know, that's what they say. The big business is not going to pay their rent, and they're not paying their rent already. So it shows their power to be able to shape the agenda because of their money, power, their control over resources, and their intimate association between politics and big business. And the idea that electing members of Parliament to sit in the House of Commons and negotiate with this big business multi-headed hydra, the idea that that is going to bring about change, that's nonsense. That's why they feared Corbyn. Because Corbyn's natural element was the streets, the demonstration, the protest. That's where he came from. And that's why they feared him. It wasn't even that he was necessarily going to actually do anything, but they feared that he might, that under pressure he might bring about change. And that's why they sabotaged him. And it was a sabotage, you know, it had international dimensions to it. It wasn't only the British, worldwide, the governments around the world and secret services and the mass media were running campaigns day in, day out against Jeremy Corbyn, particularly Israel. That's well known. You look in Israel, the Jewish newspapers from Israel, one day after another, Corbyn, front page news in Israel. Why? Because
he's an opponent of Zionism.
What's that?
He's an opponent of Zionism.
Well, he's an opponent. It's not only. It's because it's a lot. Everybody says they're opponent of racism, opponent of Zionism, or whatever, opponent of mistreatment of the Palestinians, and so. But he actually campaigned on it, and that was why they feared, because he might suddenly go into Parliament, discover he's sabotaged. I recommend you watch that film, A Very British Coup, the first one. Very good film.
Wilson, was it?
It was written by Chris Mullin. He was a member of Parliament in the Tribune group, and then it was quite close to Tony Benn for a time. And there's a TV 4-part series made in the 1980s, and it goes through the election of a Labour government, what happens, how they are consistently sabotaged when they come to power. So it is not a correct narrative. It's not factually correct that winning Parliament is the precondition for change. The precondition for change is a mass movement capable of organising the masses to bring about change. That's why the Labour Party was founded, don't forget. It wasn't founded by parliamentary politicians. It was founded by the trade unions, bringing together the workers and then seeking an expression of their ideas and interests in the parliamentary context. But always the idea was, in socialist parties, at least originally, was that those parties were there not to bring about a parliamentary majority, but to bring about social change in the balance of power between the capitalists and the workers, to overthrow capitalism and establish socialism. That's what it was there for.
But, like, for example, like, I came across people who oppose Zionism, oppose Israel, yet still wouldn't vote for Corbyn. Still present the consensus. The reason why, because they saw Corbyn's policies as unrealistic. They saw
So much for that idea.
Yeah, but they say because
As I said, the government today...
past socialism takes away incentive. And when it takes away incentive, you get naturally like an economically bankrupt society.
Well, what have we got now?
But
Like, we're not even 6 months since the election, and the government has spent more money than Corbyn would have done in 5 years, in 6 months.
This is the crisis.
What is the crisis?
Coronavirus.
The crisis isn't coronavirus. The crisis is a crisis of the administration of government and state. That's what it is. Because many countries had coronavirus, right? Vietnam had coronavirus. China had coronavirus. Well, we've only got it to that extent because they did fuck all about it. Because we have the most incompetent government outside of the United States, the most incompetent government in the world. And even compared with the United States, I think it's perfectly true. Perhaps the Brazilians, but the British have been the most incompetent. I mean, I was down in Piccadilly Circus today. It shows you the madness of the British administration. They've got a group of people standing there with masks on in the friggin' open air, with no one around, with hand sanitizers, and then with a little thing there saying Westminster advisory ambassadors on sanitation, right? Ambassador. So here we are. What is it? 23rd of March they locked down. Now it's 22nd of June, and they have ambassadors on the street indicating to people you should wear a mask in the open air, right? And the consequence, and this is months after they told everyone, up until the 15th of June, don't wear a mask anywhere. That's what they said. So, you know, the most elementary thing they could have done to prevent the spread of the disease, they chose not to. And after the disease has run through and killed 60,000 people plus, according to the ONS statistics on extra deaths, then they turn around and say, wear a mask. What sort of lunacy is that? It's just utter madness. Utter madness. Now, you know, had Corbyn been elected, you know, they would have spent that money. You can't say it was incompetence or, you know, a mad plan that wasn't viable, because they've done a much bigger plan for financial expenditure now. Not only here, but all across Europe, by the way. 750 billion euros they're now investing on a rescue package for the whole of Europe. So you cannot say that large-scale expenditure...
High taxation.
Where was the high taxation? They didn't even propose such a thing.
Well, fine. Well, what would the left propose high taxation, which would have made businesses, not attractive to Britain, but made them to America.
Well, I mean, this is the sort of delusion that they circulate around, that the whole world is spinning because some profit-making companies want it to spin. And if they don't make profit, then the whole world collapses.
Sorry?
What do you mean by economics? I've got a PhD in economics. What about it?
Right, fair enough. But I'm just saying,
The problem is, at the moment we have this madness being circulated that the government is listening to the science. That's what they said in it every day. Listening to the science. We're always informed by the science. Listen. Well, I ask you this. we have thousands and thousands of people who call themselves economists, who got PhDs in economics. What does it mean having a PhD in economics? It means you've written a piece of paper that supposedly has got a new idea in it. But in general, they don't have any new ideas in it. So they twist some story to make it appear they got some new idea, when actually they've got nothing new to offer to anybody. Economics under capitalism means trying to work out how businesses can make more money. It doesn't mean how society functions on the basis of economics. It means how I can help people to plunder other people and call it business advice, business management, business strategy, business analysis, artificial intelligence assessment of the dynamics of profitability, derivative planning through artificial intelligence, commodities trading with modern computing. It's all about robbery. Now, you can have a degree in robbery. There are many people who are skilled in robbery. There are many people who learn how to plunder. And as you know from, Scrooge in Oliver Twist, it's an art to rob someone. So, economics, 95% of modern economics is about learning the skills which Scrooge taught to the Artful Dodger and his entourage. That's all it is. How to take from the poor and hand to the rich. That's what it is. No secret. No, I say it's no secret. It is a secret. I mean, I saw this week, these loan schemes. No. Some people go. I saw someone the other day. I said, the British government's policies have been a disaster. He turns around and goes, no, I was furloughed, I'm doing all right. So I thought, that's a bit of a narrow perspective. And then I looked into these schemes. The big businesses are being offered 80% of loans. In the millions they're getting. In the millions. And their workers are furloughed. So the workers are at home getting money from the government for their wages. The business is not paying its rent, and they're getting millions in loans that are so soft, 80% guaranteed, they've got no loss to account for. It's just pure handouts. Welfare benefit handouts to the multimillionaires. That's what's happening in Britain right now. And even small businesses have been offered part of the cake. You can get a £50,000 loan as long as you had a company open on the 1st of March. You go to the bank, you say, I expect to earn £250,000 this year. Can you give me a loan? They give them 100% guaranteed £50,000 loan. So, where's, cash cows, money trees, that's what we've got now. Right? The problem is that the debt accumulated from these money trees that are being, what they used to call in Keynes time, they used to call helicopter money. You fly over a place and you just drop money out the aeroplane, hoping that will stimulate the economy. In reality, it will not stimulate the economy. Capitalism is a system whereby if I am a capitalist, I only invest my £20 if I expect to get £20 plus something. If I don't get £20 plus something, I fold the operation and I spend it on wine, women and drugs. Right? I enjoy myself with my money. Right? If, however, I'm making money out of money invested in human labourers, machinery, I accumulate capital out of that from the unpaid labour power of the workers. That's why we say labour, representing the workers, as opposed to the capitalists. Capitalists own the wealth, the money, the past labour of the workers. The workers only own, they spend this at the end of the week, and they sell their labour power to the employer to live. So that's the division in society. That's why you can't change society by having members of parliament. You can help to change society, but you can never bring about fundamental change in society by parliament. Never. Because power doesn't rest in parliament. Power rests in the companies, the banks, the big businesses. They control the workforce and the economic organisation of society on a day-by-day, minute-by-minute basis. That's how power is exercised. Back in the chair.
Why is the world full of lies?
Too much of this.
Deception.
I'll go back and forth. Yeah. Let's move a little bit because our friend over here has got a very loud voice and not much to say.
Listen to the voice of the devil.
The voice of the devil.
To the voice of God.
The voice of
And
God.
then
What's that bullshit?
I'll stand you in it. So that's the problem with the art. You see, it's about, and then you have to understand the state power. See, the Black Lives Matter thing has been part of that thing. People that have been discovering what it is. State power. You see, you got finance, you got big business. And by that I mean, you know, a couple of hundred companies at the very top of the pile. In Britain, it's maybe 200 companies control about 70% of the wealth, 80% of the wealth. More it will be after the crisis is over. Worldwide, there are 140 companies that control 40% world trade. A study by Vitali in New Scientist. And 780 companies control 80%. So, to then say you can elect a government in a national basis in one country, and then you can change the balance of power. I mean, you can pay a higher wage. You can improve the trade union right. And then what are the capitalists that are going to go on strike? I'll go to Jamaica, or I'll go to America, or I'll go to China. I'll go wherever there's capital, mobile bank, go on. So that's why the government gets scared. Reformers come to power. They say, "I'll change everything." Syriza in Greece. I'll change everything. We'll defy the banks. We'll defy the European Union. We'll defy capitalism. 2 days they fought for them and the German central bank and the German government, the European leaders. Syriza, after winning the referendum, hands down. He comes back and says, "Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we can't do this. All of you must suffer." That's what happened in Greece. Only if you got 1920, 2015 that happened. Yeah? So don't imagine that the balance is 1,000 demonstrators in the park here. 2,000 people. With a helicopter flying above, for God's sake. What do you think that's for? They don't have a helicopter. 2,000 people don't have a helicopter, although it's supposed to be a helicopter, but the helicopter's being used to watch them in case they cause trouble. Cause trouble. Trouble means challenging, bringing a movement which challenges power. That's why they're so scared about statue force. First, statue force, all in a panic. Why are they all in a panic? Because statues will give them insight into origin. You know origin, you know where you know where you come from, you know where the system comes from, you know where society comes from, you know where power comes from. Then you're dangerous. Then you're not Keir Starmer.
How would you the big businesses that control much of the world's wealth? How would you challenge them?
It's about, I remember I used to go to speaking tours with people. I went on a speaking tour with a South African revolutionary. Back in the old days when apartheid was still here. And he said, he was a leader of the iron and steel workers union in South Africa in the 1950s. And he said, we had a simple method. We would go to the workers, we would organise them. We would get them organised as much as possible, all secret underground, which of course makes it easier in some ways. So you go and meet a few people, you talk to them, they talk to others, they talk to others, say we're going to organise together, and on this day, at this time, we're going to stop tools, and we're all going to walk out. You don't want half of them or a third of them, you want all of them to walk out. All of them will walk out. You have power. Power. Strike is one initial methodology of organising the workers and realising the position in society, how power and wealth is organised. Now, of course, you organise, right? The police is suddenly there. The army is suddenly there behind them. The special services when so once you've got that framework for the workers united as force, as much as possible, 80%, 90%, 95%, then you'll have the power to break the authority. Now an example of that today will be this. In the workplace where people have been sent back to work, and I spoke to some of the leaders of the IT, this so-called crisis, and I said to them, call out the underground workers and the bus workers on strike. Unfortunately, he was a little bit scared to do it. He didn't get it done. He did say, I'll take it to the executive, but he didn't. The problem is, if you do not take that action when you have the chance, you miss the opportunity. Now there are shops down Oxford Street standing there. Members of staff being put in danger by their employer. So the workers should say, we exercise control over safety, which means they have to know, they have to inform themselves, they have to combine together, they have to discuss with each other, and when they are put in danger, out! In that way you gain a little bit of strength. And once you get a little bit of strength, then you learn how to exercise more, how to gain more, how to stand upright, instead of crawling on your hands and knees, as we do most of the time. Yes, sir. Please, sir. Free back home, sir. That's the normal standard relationship between the employer and the employee. The employee is always free back to him, sir. Otherwise, you'll be sacked. Financial Times today. How to get ahead when everything's still online. So how to get ahead in your company? By like posing yourself a certain way, offering certain skills, showing you're more keen than anybody else. Fuck off! Right? You don't have to get. What do you mean get ahead? If everyone's trying to get ahead, no one's getting ahead. All you're doing is giving more money to the employers by all of you licking their ass and doing 5 times as much as before. What the fuck use is that? What you need to do is slash the working week. 20-hour working week, 24-hour work, 6 hours, 4 days a week. Yes, okay. And we've learned during this crisis what is essential, what is inessential. The funny thing is, even though 9 million people were furloughed, 9 million people, 2 million people on, income support, whatever it is, and yet 80% of the British production carried on. We had a 20% fall, the biggest ever in history, but 80% of production continued with 11 million people sitting on their arse. Therefore, you can slash the working week, because much of the wealth in Britain, what they call wealth, what passes for wealth, is parasitism. Landlords getting rent. In other words, making nothing, but grabbing lots. That's the same in the corporate sector. Banks getting interest. Money from money. Magic. Yeah, like a magic show. And then a lot of people doing absolutely nothing. For example, Fine and Country over there. Yeah, they've got an office, costs them £150,000 a year. They pay another £200,000 a year in rates. They got 5 staff in there, all on £20,000 to £50,000 a year. And the only thing they've got for sale, you go in their shop, is a frigging picture in the window. They don't even own the things they're selling, right? All they have is they get a key off someone, and they go around and open it up, have some girl or boy in smart suit bullshit you. Oh, here's a fine location, neighbours are wonderful, blah, blah, blah. Move in, there's a drug dealer downstairs, they play me loud music day and night in the whorehouse upstairs, yeah? In the middle of Mayfair. And yet, you bought it, and then of course you're not going to believe, oh, it's very authentic. Yes, we've got prostitutes upstairs. High class escorts. So when the husband isn't happy, you can go up there. Perfectly convenient. And that's the way these people think. Someone told me once, I had a flat once, I sold it. When I was about to sell it, I wasn't doing very well. I'm not the tidiest person at home. And I had these floorboards, like wooden boards you'd see on the building sites, you know, instead of wooden floorboards, you know, not like proper wooden floorboards. So then the estate agent came around and said, we've had 20 visitors and none of them want to buy it. He said, that's right. He says to me, put on some coffee. So I put on, I don't even drink coffee. So I put on some coffee. Next day it was sold. Some twat from Eaton Square. I went, oh, lovely smell of coffee. Great place, marvellous, That's how they think. It's all superficiality. Because don't forget, if you're a multi-millionaire, the wealthier you are, the less money matters. Money only matters to the masses. Because they don't have any. If you've got multi-millions of pounds, why do you think Mayfair has got the most empty properties of any single council constituency in the country? Because the billionaires and millionaires buy, they don't even bloody remember they've got it. They buy it off the hat, yeah, I'll have that one. Some Saudi sheikh buys an apartment, sticks in a maid, right? And they sit empty. All round Mayfair, empty properties. Even on Park Lane, Monopoly Board, number 2. Half of the properties are empty. Half of that building over there is empty. It's been open 30 years. The building next to it's been empty 30 years, more than 30 years. I started speaking in 1986. It's been empty since then. So what are they talking about? They don't actually have an interest in investing to produce, to meet people's needs. This is the problem with capital. That's what the coronavirus is a crisis. It's a crisis because the deaths go up when the profits are up. So those, you open everything up straight away, like they're trying to do now, and the number of deaths will go up. Of course they will, as compared with what they would do if they weren't to open up straight away. But on the other side, if you say the profits are going down, the debts go up, that's a disaster for the economy. So then they say, okay, we need the profits up, and the debts go up. So, you're stuck in a frying pan to the fire, according to capitalism. And of course, the crisis that we have now was not caused by coronavirus. The crisis was already here. Purchasing Managers Index in December in Britain, America, Europe and Japan already declining. They were planning to contract the economy already. And they used the coronavirus as a mechanism for organising what they call pressing the reset button. In other words, an orchestrated collapse of the economy. And then the big businesses, through getting massive subsidies from the state, from your money, from your parents' money, or better said, from your children's money and your children's children's money, all that is going to be used to subsidise. In Britain, the loans they're giving out is equivalent to the whole of the national production for a year, all given to big business to rape the economy. And that's what they're going to do, I guarantee. I tell you what, you'll see Costa's, Starbucks in every bloody corner. And the corner shops will be closing down. Boom, 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 boom. The big boys will clean up the game. And that's what it's about. It's not about protecting the people. It's about robbing the people in the name of protecting the people. And what, if they wanted to protect the people? As I said, 8th of March I was here. People mocked me. I said 3 weeks shutdown. That's all you need. 3 weeks shutdown, and we would have had 100 deaths maybe, 100. And they've admitted that. And the so-called epidemiologists, the so-called experts, the so-called government advisors, they haven't got a piece of shit between their heads. You watch Matt Hancock, and what do you want? Your natural instinct of a normal human being is to punch him in the face. The lying pig. You remember in the old days, they used to say, an airplane crashed in Bolivia yesterday, 3 Britons on board, whole story in the news. Now they say 200 dead yesterday, sadly. Now let's move on to the next question. Directly as a result of government policy. Directly as a result of government policy. There's no excuses for this. The official figure, 45,000 odd people dead. ONS statistics tell you it's over 65,000 dead. Why are they dead? Because for lack of a mask, they didn't give them masks, and they told the population no need to wear a mask. Why did they say no need to wear a mask? Because they didn't have any masks. That's why. They didn't have the bloody fluffy thing to stick on your face. That's why the people died. And then they said, oh, don't wear a mask. Go into the supermarket. You're British. You're Superman. It doesn't matter. It won't affect you. Because that's how it spread. One to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. Until we had tens of thousands of deaths. It's self-evident. Just look at the other countries. You know, look at New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, for God's sake, Ethiopia, for God's sake. Even Iran, where the health service is poor, but they don't have the deaths. Nowhere near the number of deaths we have here. Now, there are some regional differentiations, but the key reason for the deaths here is policy of the government, idiocy from the government, lies from the government, propaganda from the government, shit from the government, going on about, oh yes, we listen to the science. And they don't, they listen to the science, but you're not allowed to see what that science is. It's secret. One day, they say one day, when all this is over, we'll have an investigation. And the investigation will apportion blame. We know who they will blame. They will blame the health service. That's who they'll blame. They got you all out clapping, right? That's the game. All of you cheer. And then once you've cheered, then you're going to be let down by the same people you cheered. Evidence for this argument? Grenfell Tower. When Grenfell Tower burnt down, I remember seeing the video people were making, and they said, look at the cladding, it's burning down because of the cladding. Who got the blame? A 3-year inquiry, the fire brigade had to blame. That's what they said. So don't think I'm joking. They will blame the health service. And it will be a lie. The other lies, you know, like the old... Anyone seen News at 10 2 days ago? News at 10. BBC, the most objective and honest news service in the world. What's the main news story? BBC reporter in Wuhan he runs in front of the virology lab with the camera, and he stands there next to a security guard, not a policeman, security guard. He stands there and he starts filming. Did the virus originate here? Are the Chinese lying? They're always lying, the Chinese. They're always... Remember Fu Manchu? He's a liar. You know, that's the game. Virus from a friggin' factory, from a virology lab in China. That's their stupid story. Idiots, fools, morons. And then they remember they said, oh, Chinese eat bats. That was the story. And everyone you see, I guarantee, if you're on the internet, social media, someone you know will have said, oh yeah, but the Chinese are disgusting, the way they eat bats. Like that. Now, I'm half Chinese. I went on the internet, I did a search. Bat, you know, if they got it on the menu somewhere, it'll be there. You won't find one menu from one restaurant back in time where a Chinese restaurant to serve bats. You will not find it. But when you look online, eating bats, restaurant menu, you will find bats being eaten. You'll find a report by a young vegetarian woman in Florida, the United States of America, who went to Smoky restaurant in Florida and ordered smoked bat. And she gave up vegetarianism in order to eat a bat. And she said it tasted like chicken. So here you have the thing they accuse the Chinese of, they themselves do. They falsely accuse the Chinese of what they themselves do. And then the BBC knows fully well that the bat story is false. They know fully well it didn't come from the virology lab. But then they say, this is the big joke now, they say, oh yes, but what if? Was it possible it came from... Of course it's possible it came from a lab. It's possible it came from me in Hyde Park because a bat flew above my head and shat on me. It's perfectly possible to catch a virus from a bat anywhere in the world where bats are. It could have come from London Zoo, where a member of staff enters the bat enclosure and gets infected. That's the nature of zoonotic transmission from bats to humans, either directly or through an intermediary animal.
You're making this up as you go along.
Of course I am. How else am I supposed to do it? I am not a virtual repetition on the internet.
Your bullshit is better quality than the other bullshit.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad you've appreciated that after 30 years of harassing me. Where are we?
See you next week.
Yeah, see you later, yeah. I see you don't hang around there, you've got a lovely lady with you. Anyway, where were we? Any questions or contributions from the audience? Yeah, go on.
And you say they don't need bats in China?
Yeah, they don't need bats.
Well, Wikipedia says they do.
Don't forget
Show
we're
me.
talking about bat soup, not actually
Show me.
bats.
Show me on Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is made by people. So show us. What does it say?
So what are you saying? So what happened? So you're saying what then?
I'm saying, what? Nothing. I'm just entertaining you, keeping you busy.
Right, that was the question I asked.
Bats are
So
eaten by
that's the
people in
question.
parts of some Asia, Pacific Rim countries and cultures, including China. Including China.
So that's the
Click
question.
this and the link for.
That's going to give me the Wikipedia page for
Well, it's
China.
going to give the reference.
No, give me the Wikipedia page.
Well, then that's not evidence, is it? That's just assertion.
Well, that's what I said.
Wikipedia is a website where anybody can go on and add whatever they like. Well, of course they're going to say China if the BBC say China and every other. But if you look up bats, restaurant, eating, you'll only find Florida.
So you're saying they're lying about the virus source
Well,
was
the,
in fact-
we don't know what the virus source is, apart from the fact that the DNA or the RNA of the virus indicates it's 97% or so from a bat. So it probably comes from bats. Why do bats host so many viruses? Because it's the only mammal which flies. And as such, it has an extremely rapid metabolism. It can tolerate having large numbers of diseases in it that other mammals cannot tolerate. And so if you contact bats, many people contact, I've got a friend of mine, I've got a picture of her, she's like holding a bat like that. I mean, people do contact bats. When I was a kid, I remember finding a bat on my balcony when I was at my dad's house, and I picked it up. I didn't know, I was a little kid, you know. I passed it on to all of you. And so,
Are you saying it's a
now,
suspicious
now
circumstance?
it is also true that the latest evidence from Italy shows that the virus was in Italy on the 18th of December. So it's as likely to have started somewhere in Europe as it is in China. There was also in Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia, last summer, June 19, an outbreak of an unknown virus which had exactly the same symptoms
And the military
as...
and the US military did go to...
Well, yes, it doesn't mean they passed it on. I
But
don't
it doesn't mean it didn't. We don't know.
Well, but that's not a logical method of argument. That's the method of argument of the BBC. I understand why you use it, because the BBC is supposed to be an authority. But let me just tell you this.
No, you've applied that to
the
me, but you
British
don't know.
bullshit company, that's what it is.
Say again?
The British bullshit company.
I'm not saying that. I'm just
no, I
saying
said, but
it's a
I understand why
possibility.
you use that method of argument. It's not adequate to say you can't prove it didn't. You can't prove I didn't cause the bat virus everywhere.
1 minute.
Unless you check my old DNA and say, no, I'm not going to let you.
Do you say...
Because I believe in my freedom.
Would you say it's a very suspicious circumstances? They're saying it's from bats. When bats have been there for thousands of years, have eaten this or that or whatever in China, all of a sudden, when you've
not all
got
of a
5G
sudden.
coming around, you've got the China trade war, 2019 there was shadow banking collapse, which not a lot of people know.
What's that got to do with
And
a
then all
bat?
of a sudden you've
It's
got
not
this
Batman,
very
it's a bat.
you've got this convenient virus that's come out and closed down all businesses and everything.
Well-
Don't you think that's a lot of coincidence, a bit coincidence?
Well, the coincidence is this, is that people are confusing the economic collapse with the virus. They think the economic collapse is caused by the virus, because the government also wants you to believe that the economic collapse is caused by the virus.
Exactly.
The economic
Do you trust
collapse
the
is not caused by the virus. The economic collapse is caused by the social structure in Britain and the social structure in America. That means they are incapable of doing anything to protect the people, even when they have one of the most extensive healthcare systems in the world. They were incapable of giving the members of staff masks. So if they didn't have masks, then anybody coming in with a virus into one hospital infects the whole hospital. If they infect the whole hospital, the health service collapses. So they had to clear all the other patients out. They cleared them out and sent them to the care homes. There they didn't check that the people had got the virus. So then they passed the virus into the care homes and thousands of people died there. That's what happened, and it had nothing to do with the virus. It had to do with the structure of the organisation of the system. Not the virus, the system, the human relations in society organised by capitalism. That's why people died. Not because of the virus. No one needed to die of the virus. Look at New Zealand. No one needed to die. In Vietnam, 95 million people. They had the virus early on, right at the beginning. No one died of it. There's no one at all, is it? Is that right, Vietnam? No one at all. 95 million. And the healthcare system in Vietnam, very poor. What they have in Vietnam is they knock round on people's doors and they ask you, are you feeling okay? They came back again and again. They checked up on people. They did that in Cuba as well. Cuba's also a poor country. Someone came here earlier and said, got a relative over there, they're starving. Well, even if they're starving, they don't get the virus. Because they make the effort to knock. Has anybody knocked on your door, asked how you are? Or your neighbour? Nobody. They had 750,000 volunteers, remember?
Yeah.
We want volunteers. We've got 750,000. Have you ever heard of a volunteer doing anything? They're incapable of organising anything. They got the military involved. What they did was build a bloody thing they didn't need. Right? That's all they did. They should have been in charge of logistical organisation. Mobilise the volunteers, knock on the doors, make sure everyone's safe, provide them with food if they're not. We don't know. Last week they showed newspapers revealing some of the stories now. People smell a bad smell. Something wrong in the block. They look at the house where they've not knocked before, when no one's gone round. There used to be an old person, they'll drop down dead. Their body rotting and stinking inside their flat. That's what they've been finding the last couple of weeks. So don't tell me that there's a competent government. It is the most incompetent government in British, in living memory.
And what government would have done a better job? What you're doing is you're just trying to take this government because it's not a
my friend,
wing.
do you think I have to try to attack them?
Yeah, because you've got this like, you know, say,
I mean, when have you heard me supporting them?
What I'm saying is, right, I'm going back to the source of the problem. How many people actually died of the virus itself? That is the problem. It's a very, very tiny amount.
It's a mistake to argue what you're asking.
Why?
Because you're misunderstanding the dynamics of this. I just explained it, I'll go over it once again.
The government was incompetent to control it and prevent these deaths. How many deaths were just the virus itself? That's always connected to some other underlying issue any person had. That's how in addition to his underlying health issue, he had the virus. And they're trying to blame all of the virus.
According to the study, according to a detailed study of autopsies in Hamburg in Germany, they found that 75% of those people who find as died from COVID had died from COVID. 25% had died with COVID, but not from COVID. Now, if you extrapolate that to Britain, I think that's probably quite accurate. So in terms of the official statistics of those who died, from 45,000 you might end up with about 32,000. However, there are additional deaths to them, which are not counted in the government figures at all, which are about how many people died over and above what would have died normally. Now that can be both COVID and diseases which people had because they haven't gone to hospital, they haven't get treatment, they haven't received cancer care, they haven't had cancer detected, or multiple other ailments which have been rife in the community because the hospitals were closed to normal admission. Now, there was no way not to close them unless you isolated people and left them to die at home. So, you know, it's a false argument coming from, I won't call them conspiracy theories, people who are arguing about this figure. The argument came originally from a German lung expert by the name of Wolfgang Wodak. Wolfgang Wodak disseminated a video very early on in the crisis where he said this is a normal coronavirus, there's no special characteristics to it, and people, the only way you will know if there genuinely is a problem, is when you analyse the extra deaths vis-a-vis previous years. Now, in Germany, it remained true up until today, because only 8,000 people died in Germany, that was not significantly different to what happened in previous years. So in Germany, because, sorry?
2,000 versus 8,000.
Who said 2,000? Who said 2,000? Germany. 2,000 Germany.
Go on, my son.
So the issue was, in Germany, where they have got an adequate healthcare system, and where they have also community healthcare investigators, trackers, tracers, testing and the rest of it, the system was capable, more capable than Britain and than America and than France and Spain, of dealing with the crisis. And therefore you could argue, if the whole world was Germany, you could argue, well, it's no different from a normal virus. Except in Britain and in France and in Spain, they didn't have those resources. And that's why the figures are way above what they would. In fact, the figures for extra deaths in Britain are far higher than the official figures of deaths from coronavirus.
But that figure you're quoting is if you have another
65,000.
underlying issue as well.
What
Just the
about-
COVID-19.
My friend, you know, you're implying that underlying health issues are something that's a rarity. They're
No.
not rare. Being old is not rare, right? It's not rare. It happens to the best of us, right? The other thing is having illnesses, which can be defined as comorbidities, like having diabetes. Lots of people got diabetes.
Yeah,
Having, for example, heart problems.
Yeah.
Lots of people have heart problems.
yeah.
So it's perfectly true that most of the people who die, 90%, 90+%, have comorbidities, probably two. Now, the point is, you either turn around and say, well, who gives a fuck? They got comorbidities, going to die anyway. Right? Or you turn around and say, as the health system is supposed to do, we will treat you to try to protect your life and try and keep you alive, regardless of your comorbidities. That's the nature of the health service. Health service is there to try and keep people alive. So that's the argument. That's all it boils down to.
My point is, the actual numbers of people dying, God rest them, of COVID only is very low.
Very low.
We do.
That's not true. That's not true. As I said, there was a study
Right at
done.
the beginning-
A study done in Hamburg, autopsies, where the
I studied,
where
there's
the,
hundreds of, there's a lot of
yes,
studies
but not
with a lot of
not many,
professors,
not many of
a lot
them.
of professors that are saying today, please, a lot of professors saying today, you really look at the detailed numbers,
There are.
COVID
There are
only
a lot of people. There are a lot of people saying that.
spreadable a lot, but not as bad as what you think it is. It's very low, the actual deaths of COVID only. And I think all over the world it's exaggerated to close everything
Well,
down.
okay, you said your point. I don't believe you're accurate. I don't believe you're correct.
No, not
I
me,
cite-
the professors.
Well, you're saying the professors have said that.
I will bring you a list next week.
I know there are a list of these people. Right? I mean, I've got a doctorate as well, so I call myself doctor. So I publish something that's as truthful as somebody else. Because, well, what specialist?
Academics.
What do you mean? I'm an academic. What does it mean? It just means I've got a PhD. That's it.
Scientific,
What else?
academic, specialised.
What is it?
Do you specialise in viruses?
Well, I specialise in China, and China's supposed to be the source.
Well, you specialise in China, what viruses?
Well, I specialise in the Chinese social system.
Yeah, and
That's
everything
why-
that says in virology. Which isn't very.
Well, does virology allow you to...
Your point is professors, specialists.
Yeah, but
the virus
does
and
that
all
make
that.
them correct?
So I guess it's more likely to make them correct than it's going to make you correct with your academic background.
That's what we're saying.
No, because they are not doing, unless they carry out a large-scale study themselves, and many of them have, and many of them contradict each other. I followed the virologists discussing in Germany. At least they had a discussion about it in Germany, which was public. Here they don't. Here they have a discussion of modelers. Like this guy Neil Ferguson, he's a virologist, he's a modeler.
Exactly.
He's a computer modeler.
Exactly.
Not a virologist.
We're the best. He claims we
Yeah, we're full of bullshit. We've got the biggest bullshitters. Right? Anyone can make a model. You put in the data, you get the result. Of course. What? The modelling the British government uses and Dominic Cummings is shit. Total shit. And if this hasn't revealed that, I don't know what has.
But the general election.
So you're upset about Dominic Cummings?
This is the problem they have, you see.
The general
Dominic Cummings, well, it showed they can win an election. Winning an election and fighting a virus are two different things. I know Dominic Cummings doesn't realise that, but they are two
So
different
you're
things.
saying he's not a genius?
Sorry?
You're saying Dominic
He's
Cummings?
an imbecile.
Why?
He's an imbecile.
He took on the Europe.
Exactly, it's the same jump that stupidity that Ralph comes up with.
Got the Brexit vote, and you're telling me he's an
It's a
idiot.
jump that stupidity. Everything's an algorithm. Right? And in fact, last week, or just a couple of days ago, the British government had to admit their great AI, their great analysis of data, their tracking and tracing, the greatest in the world beaters, ramping it up.
Oh,
Turns
I'd
out they
love to see
dump
what
it around the
Jeremy-
crowd.
I'd
They
love to see
dump
what
it in the
your
rubbish
Jeremy
bin.
Corbyn would have said.
What?
Your Jeremy Corbyn, what would he have said? How would he have handled everything?
I'm telling you what I'm thinking.
Hindsight, it's very easy.
Well, my friend, as you know, it wasn't hindsight for me. I was standing here 8th of March and I said lockdown yesterday. So don't say it's hindsight for me. 'Cause I said it. I called it. There have been millions, 8 million infected. Yes.
Sort it out.
Sorry? Well, even so, half that is 250,000, so what's the problem? It's good, is it? What I said was, you'd need a lockdown to eliminate the virus. They didn't lock down. They didn't lock down until 2 weeks later. That's why. Sorry? Well, it is possible.
Viruses hang around, they get weaker. We go resistant, but you can't eliminate them.
Well,
we eliminated smallpox, but that took ages and really serious work to do.
And SARS-2? SARS, the original SARS? Sorry, the original SARS?
Do you literally mean...
Hang on, the original SARS? 2003 SARS. This is SARS-2, SARS-1. Where's that?
I don't know.
It was eliminated. It was eliminated.
What, you mean there is no SARS virus?
There are no SARS cases around the world. No.
Really? Oh, cases, but wait a minute. Are we talking about eliminating the actual virus or eliminating our susceptibility to it? They're different things.
It dies out. It dies out.
Or we
disappears,
get
that's how it
immune
is.
to it.
Or we become immune to it. That's correct.
There you go.
Or it dies
So
out.
just clarifying.
So that's what I mean by eliminate.
Okay, we're in agreement. We're in agreement.
But in terms of Britain, we know what it means. We mean they should have shut down the country, prevented it from spreading, and let it die out. But they didn't.
No, but then we don't develop
That's-
any sort of herd immunity.
What
so
frigging herd immunity?
freaking herd
What
immunity?
herd immunity? 3,000 infections a day in Britain at the moment. More than 3,000 infections a day. What herd immunity? That's a rubbish. Herd immunity. How has Sweden done well?
Where comes the Greeks? Dimitri.
Not much different to what?
They didn't lock down like the rest of the countries, but their fatalities are not that much different to the other countries that did lock down.
I mean, they're nearly as bad as us. Yeah. The difference is Sweden is a much more dissipated population. They have a 10 million population in a large country. We have 10 million people in this city alone. So there is a difference. Density of population encourages spread. Many people in Sweden, they live in a house. Most people, 60% of the population in Stockholm, for example, 60% of the population in Stockholm live on their own.
Pollution. Pollution is what causes
Pollution can
Italy
also-
and
pollution
China have got
may
very high
facilitate.
pollution. That's why there was a big spread and a lot of people are
May facilitate. The evidence is not that strong, but it may facilitate.
Do you think we should practice more ethnic distancing?
Well, what?
Do you think we should practice ethnic distancing?
Well, that's what's going on.
After COVID.
That's what's going on at the moment. That's why the attack on the Chinese, because they want to make out that it's something to do with the general trade war and conflict with China. And it's about the Chinese system. That dickhead Steve Bannon, I know you love him, that dickhead Steve Bannon, he's run a daily video program in which he claimed the CCP virus made by the CCP. What a bunch of idiots these people are.
Why is China not allowing us to do an investigation?
Why is China not allowing Australia to invade China?
Question.
Of the COVID virus.
Very good
Australia
question.
to do what?
Independent inquiry. Independent. That's it. Independent inquiry.
Independent.
It's a very good question.
They have said they'll have an independent. They have said they'll have an independent.
They're about to kill.
Please be honest.
For
now.
what?
Well, they
What's
said
he done?
he was smuggling drugs, but they actually framed it on him.
You mean in China there's a law that says you can be executed for smuggling drugs?
Yeah, but
and
he was
been
framed.
caught.
He was framed by the Chinese.
What,
It's
are
okay to
you
say
his lawyer?
They're using it
Are
as
you
a
his
bargain.
lawyer?
They're bargaining with the Australians because the Australians want an independent inquiry of the origins of the COVID.
I mean, if
and
you
the
look,
Chinese
at the
are being
news,
arseholes.
Very good question.
if you look at the attacks on China at the moment, they come firstly, well they are attacks, they come firstly from Steve Bannon and his entourage in the United States, and the second place they come from is Sky News Australia.
Nevertheless, it's
Which-
legitimate question.
Which means they come from Rupert Murdoch.
Nevertheless,
What a shame.
nevertheless,
What a
they're
shame Sky
legitimate
UK
question.
isn't the same. What a shame Sky UK
It's not the
isn't the
same. No, that's
same.
right. It's not.
Shame, isn't it?
Nevertheless,
I
they're
wish Sky
legitimate
UK was
questions.
like Sky Australia.
And you know, Canada has imprisoned Chinese people.
Oh, for God's sake. What's this got to do with the issue?
And well, China's done the same. They're imprisoning Canadian citizens.
Oh, what about it? So it's tit for tat, so what?
Yeah, it's bargaining because they don't.
Global tit for tat.
That's okay in your book.
What do you mean that's okay in your book?
Well, you're
The
saying,
British,
so what?
The
You're
British
belittling.
murdered tens of thousands of people in Iraq, Afghanistan,
Right or
India,
wrong?
and
Right
we're
or
supposed to
wrong?
talk about one frigging Australian.
High profile.
Charged with rugby.
High profile.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, but it's not high profile, that one.
He's high profile because this guy wants to make him high profile because it allows him to attack China on spurious
So I'm not
grounds.
happy with your answer. The gentleman's asked, why do they block Australia to question China
Who the
about
fuck
the
are the
blood?
Australians to investigate China?
Well,
That is
they're a
not
nearer
an answer.
neighbour than we are. So
That is not an answer.
Not just Australia, it's New Zealand, it's America, Canada, the Five Eyes Alliance.
Five eyes, exactly.
That is not an answer, is it? Though?
Well, it
That's
is an
not
answer.
a very
It
intelligent
is an
answer. Come on.
The United States of America are preparing the grounds for military confrontation with China.
Yeah.
They have been for a long time.
Is that why they won't answer
The excuse
Australia?
they are using is Hong Kong and Taiwan. They started with Hong Kong. And they're no, there are lots of young kids in
That's
Hong
away
Kong.
from the question.
The fact of the matter is, while China was expanding 30 years
Yeah.
from 1997, the living standards in Hong Kong fell.
Yeah.
That's not because of the Chinese, it's because
Fell
the
from
British
what level, though?
four
Quite high,
wealthiest
weren't
people in Hong Kong
Yeah.
were enriched by the British.
Yeah.
They control the land in Hong Kong.
And capitalism.
They control the property of Hong Kong.
Capitalism.
And they are the capitalists of Hong Kong.
So if China adopted capitalism,
They
it'd be great.
made the lives
China
of
could
the
reach
Hong
the
Kong
same high
people
level
worse.
as Hong Kong.
Yes.
And the Hong Kongers, because they're stuck in their apartment blocks, packed
With all their
together.
wealth and success.
Well, not with their wealth.
No, wait a minute,
The
go on.
overwhelming majority of
The
people in
highest
Hong
IQ,
Kong are poor.
best educational system.
Overwhelming majority of
China.
people in Hong Kong
Yeah.
are poor.
Yeah.
They have tiny apartments.
Relative to China.
But look how we
Even
lose.
relative to
Really?
China now, yes.
Be
Relative
quiet.
to the urban areas in China. If you go to
What
Shenzhen,
percentage
But
of
what's
China
that
is
got to
there?
do with the
What
question?
Percentage of China is there?
Why can't Australia question the Chinese?
Why is
if
China?
you go across the border from China to Shenzhen, Shenzhen has a larger population than Hong Kong. And the living standards of the people are higher than the living standards in Hong Kong. And yet Shenzhen in 1985 was a village.
So was Hong
And that's
Kong.
why
So was
I
Hong Kong.
won't
Nothing.
answer
So is Hong
They
Kong.
have created a city
And Britain made it
next
into
door,
the
half
envy
an
of the
hour,
world.
from Hong Kong, where the living standards are higher than the people of Hong Kong who've had capitalism and British support for 150 years. Because we bombed the Chinese to force them to take opium. So that's the
Because
background.
we wouldn't trade
What's that
anything
Now
else apart from silver.
the young kids sitting
should have
around
just traded silver
on the
with them.
streets in Hong Kong, deprived of a reasonable living standards, have been whipped up by 40,000 American-sponsored NGOs based in China, to advocate, yes,
Individual
40,000
organisations.
40,000 NGOs.
Individual people,
yes,
organisations.
NGOs.
40,000.
40,000.
separate organisations.
Financed and backed by the NED from the United States of America. National Endowment for Democracy. They finance them in order to promote so-called democracy. They complain after 1 year of protests, where they were smashing up tube stations, smashing up shops, beating people up. After 1 year of these protests, smashing up the airport, the British journalists are, well, the Chinese are now going to take control of Hong Kong. God forbid, democracy and freedom is under threat. But they forget to tell you, until 1997, there were no democratic elections in Hong Kong under the British. And under Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, when there was unrest in Hong Kong, the British said, we will use live rounds against the protesters in Hong Kong. So don't talk shit about the freedom of Hong Kong.
China would never
it's
use
bullshit.
live rounds.
Well, they haven't used live rounds in Hong Kong, have they?
Not in Hong Kong.
They haven't.
Why do
There was one incident where a policeman shot someone. There was one instance where a policeman shot someone where his life was genuinely in danger. And you can see the video of that on YouTube.
Why is China experimenting with super soldier, genetics? Like they are experimenting on embryos. They're trying to get rid of diseases like HIV and trying to make them into super soldiers. Don't you think that's a bit scary?
I don't know what you're talking about, so I can't talk about what I don't know about.
Chinese experimenting with super soldiers.
Well, here you have it, you see. You have a Black Lives Matter demonstration, but it's useless because we have the same problem here. It's not about Black lives, it's about China. And that's the dominant narrative today. The dominant narrative in the world today. Make no mistake about it, whether you agree with me or not. The narrative of whipping up hatred against China is the dominant narrative in the world.
I want to free the Chinese.
Where's the evidence of that?
The Chinese from their tyranny.
Yesterday, BBC, News at 10, yesterday. 2 days ago.
Well, it wasn't. China wasn't mentioned on this morning.
You don't have to agree with it. You might oppose China. You might think all the arguments are right. No, I'm saying you could agree with all the narrative, but I'm saying to you that is the narrative. Now, this gentleman who's spouting it out like some echo chamber for the bullshit
no
brigade.
need to personally attack the gentleman who's asked a
I said
perfectly
an echo
legitimate
chamber.
question.
Echo chamber. It's not a perfectly legitimate question. It is the acceptable face of global racism today.
No,
is to attack the Chinese. That's what it is. It is. It's the acceptable face.
I agree.
I want the Chinese to have their emperor again. Fuck the communists.
That's like people saying you can't criticise Israel because it makes you anti-Semitic. Well, it's exactly the same line, isn't it? You're saying
exactly
you can't attack the Chinese state because it's racist against Chinese people.
Firstly, you were a huge supporter of the argument that anybody who came out with anything anti-Semitic in the Labour Party should be expelled. I remember distinctly you arguing that that was the right way to approach it.
It doesn't mean you can't criticise the
now
state
you
of
are
Israel.
saying
You can't
to use your own criteria that you used to defend Israel cannot be used by me to defend China.
So
that's firstly the equality of argument.
No,
Using your own criteria,
I've never said you can't criticise the state of Israel. You are saying you can't criticise the state of China because it's evidence of racism against the Chinese. Sheer nonsense.
I've never said that.
No, but you say
What I
it's
said, global racism against China. Global racism was your word.
The main thrust of global racism is anti-Chinese at the moment.
And where's the evidence of that? Where's any anti...
My biggest critique of China is the government is not really socialist.
Enough.
Sorry? Yes. By socialist, and by the way, you can check this, because there are people who accuse me of being some agent for the Chinese state. You can check my articles in the Chinese press, where I've consistently raised the idea that the workers should democratically elect the management of every workplace. I've argued this and they published it in the Chinese press. So you can't criticise me on that. You can criticise what I write, yes, but don't say I'm an agent for the Chinese state.
Was China right in stopping to import beef from Australia?
And by the way, unlike many of you, I stood by what I stand for. I was on Tiananmen Square in 1989. I argued on Tiananmen Square for exactly the same arguments I'm arguing now. For democratic control over the workplaces, democratic control over the state, democratic control over the Communist Party. That's what I argued for. And I was on the square in 1989 on the 4th of June.
Some sort of private enterprise.
Sorry?
Let's say someone started their own enterprise. You would not allow that. You would take their own.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. One of the things the Chinese have done correctly, in comparison with the Soviet Union, was to allow private enterprise to operate within the framework of an economy dominated by the public sector. And so what that means is, when the government says we want to build roads, schools, hospitals, we want to raise the living standards, we want to house the people, they can utilise the resource of the state, the banks, the big industries, the big construction companies, the transportation system, telecommunications, the infrastructure of society can be pushed forward by the state, and around the state gathers the private sector like iron filings around a magnet. So that's the reason why China develops rapidly.
Do you believe that America will attack
I believe, for example, that the conflict happening in India at the moment is orchestrated by the Americans.
I agree with you. So, Trump only recently went to India, didn't he? Trump only recently went to India.
They've been building landing stations for aircraft, military aircraft, right next to the border with China.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, so this is the nature. When war begins,
You do talk a lot of sense.
when war begins with a major power, like the Soviet Union, it always begins in peripheral areas first. So they will pick Hong Kong, they will pick India, they will try and pressurize Imran Khan in Pakistan, but he's pretty much in league with the Chinese at the moment. They will try and push in every country where China is trying to get influence through Belt and Road. They will intervene. And they're saying to the Africans as well, don't deal with China, don't deal with China. The problem is, the Africans know. If you, like when Mobutu was in power in the Congo, the French and the Belgians, they went to him and said, we want your copper. He said, okay, I'll make a deal, I'll give you a copper. You give me 5 billion, you get the copper. But when he got the 5 billion, he didn't keep the money in the Congo, he put the money in Switzerland. So they get the copper and they get the money back as well. That's the point. Now the Chinese, when they went to the Congo, they said, we want your copper, but in exchange we will build roads, schools, hospitals. And they built them. It's there in the Congo for the people to use. So that's the difference. They didn't just plunder everything and leave them with nothing. And after all, the British were there. You know, Mr. Livingston, you know, they were there right back. 1860s, 1870s, 1896 Congress of Berlin. They divided Africa up. They were always there, and yet they did nothing to develop Africa.
Now, do you think
Nothing.
Do you think a major war will break out?
Personally, I think the wars will start initially over skirmishes in different border areas and areas of influence for the Chinese.
And the man-made
And
islands.
then they will escalate it. But the British are pushing this now with Hong Kong. They are the agents of the Americans in Hong Kong. But I don't believe the Americans and the British will go to war over Hong Kong. It is a bipartisan issue in America, by the way. Both the Democrats and Republicans scream, China, China, China. So it's quite clear they are scared. They are spooked. Sorry?
I said, fuck China!
So, as I said, Black Lives Matter is an appearance. In reality, many people will still come out with anti-Chinese stuff, thinking that's fine. Because it's a much wider question.
So again, saying fuck China as a racist statement.
Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, because it means the Chinese people, it doesn't mean China.
Well, that's your interpretation.
Just a quick thing. Just to reiterate a question I had before. Let's say I wanted to start my own construction company. I've been a bricklayer for 5 years. I employ another person. I keep growing and growing. It gets to the size of about 100 employees. And I'm like, look at me, I've done all this construction work. Do you believe I should be replaced if the workers say, we don't want that guy to leave anymore?
And lose your incentive.
It really depends on the circumstances. Let me give you an example. There's nothing unusual about a founder of a company being ousted. For example,
Do you think that's right?
let me just give an example. Let me give an example. Stelios, EasyJet owner, he set up EasyJet, he set up all these schemes. The shareholders started looking at him and saying, this guy's a maverick, he's out of control, he's not going to bring us our dividends. And they booted him out of his own company. So capitalism does this anyway. Now, if
It's providing a valuable service though, isn't it?
if your company is successful, you've got 100 employees, the workers want a wage increase and you don't want to give it, the workers, in my opinion, have the right to demand that wage increase. It may clash with you. They demand if they want.
But why can't you have free capitalism where they can find a job elsewhere? And then this company be messed up and he'll get his wages.
Let me finish the nuance for you.
That's how it should be.
I said I support what they have done in this respect in China, and that is they have allowed private enterprise to develop. Now, as long as it achieves the objective advance in the public sector in society, which it has in China. And therefore, I am not even opposed in principle to the existence of billionaires. I'm not even opposed to that. I did write an article for the Chinese where I said I believe there should be a maximum wage of about £10 million. But Chinese, okay, in the Chinese press. In English. But some of them are circulating in Chinese as well. Now, the question is not the accumulation of individual capital. The question is money power. So it's how you translate money into power relations in society. Now in China, Alibaba, Jack Ma is one of the richest guys in the world. One of the biggest companies in the world, right? But he's a member of the Communist Party, and if he does anything they don't approve of, he get booted out.
You're quite radical.
Basically,
in our current economic model, you're quite radical, aren't you?
Well, you see, I might appear to be radical because you haven't followed the last 3 months. The government at the moment in Britain has spent about twice the amount of money that they accused Corbyn of being mad to being planned to spend. So, and I was accused when I stood before we had
what I'm trying to do.
Compare the two scenarios. Come on. No pandemic.
The pandemic isn't the virus. The pandemic is capitalism. The system of society we live under. You know, he was pointing out to me. 1 minute. He was pointing out to me they all had comorbidities. British capitalism has multiple comorbidities. That's why we're in the crisis we are. New Zealand capitalism doesn't have those comorbidities.
You might be shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to change our current economic thing by just going far too left. You've got to
far too left.
Just being like,
over 2/3 of the money allocated by the British government during this crisis is to big business.
Yeah, I know.
I believe it should have been the other way around. 2/3 of the money should have gone to the people.
Furlough scheme, which ends up in our pockets.
Well, I'd even go.
No,
I'd say
big
UBI.
business, direct subsidies,
Not the money for the
furlough scheme.
He wants to steal your company after you built it up and give it to the people.
That's my friend. I know you.
Socialism
I know
are
you.
thieves. That's what
I
it is.
know you. I know you're a businessman, and I know you're not stupid enough not to have benefited from the coronavirus loans and so on. I know you're not. I know you're
Because
not.
business is doing really well at the moment.
I'm sure.
Do you think
that,
it is,
I mean, he is not looking miserable, and I know his business, and I know in theory,
I'm very proud.
you should be looking miserable.
service to people.
Because your business should definitely be in trouble. But it's not. And I know why it's not. Because the government is giving money hand over fist.
You think he's jealous that they're giving more money than Jezza even?
I'm not giving money to the
I'm
government.
pointing out
That we've got quite a left-wing conservative
you can't
government.
argue
Who
with
would
me
have dreamt a conservative
that
government would have done what this conservative government has done? Who would have
they've
dreamt
done really
5
good.
years ago, 2 years ago?
Done
But
it
we've had a
very well.
conservative government with a big majority.
that's the
We're
point.
doing so much.
Steve, that is the point.
And you hate it.
We're
It is
agreeing.
not about conservative. It is about the
not there.
state of the society. They were forced to act because of the comorbidities that exist in the structure of the organisation of British society.
I agree.
British society has many sicknesses. It has no organisational capacity to cope with the most minimal sudden spikes in demand. The key one having been a lack of PPE for staff in hospitals.
Toilet rolls.
That's
It
why
was
we've
toilet
got
rolls
tens
for
of
1 week.
thousands rather than
Then they
thousands.
recovered.
That's why we have tens of thousands of deaths rather than thousands. And why did black and ethnic minority people die in larger numbers? Because they work in these sectors, cleaning, catering. They work in the lowest
Cleaners
paid
are more
jobs.
susceptible to.
Of course they are. They go
Why?
into a hospital, they clean
Well,
the
not
care
most
home.
cleaners aren't in hospital.
In any workplace where you go into an enclosed environment,
Office
you are-
workers are in enclosed
Yes,
environments. CEOs
yes,
are in
yes,
enclosed
but they
environments.
turn around to them and they say, you can go home. The cleaner still has to clean. The security guard still has to
Not
be
if their
there.
workplaces are empty.
And the key sectors, as
Bus
I pointed
drivers.
out, the key sectors, transportation, health service, healthcare workers, cleaners in the healthcare sector, all these sectors, you have a larger percentage of black people doing those jobs than you do as a percentage of the population, much larger. That accounts for the extra death. Quite apart from the fact also that there are larger numbers of black people and ethnic minority people living in high-rise blocks. In high-rise blocks, the moment you get in a lift and someone coughs, well then you get in the lift 5 minutes later, you can still get the virus. So there's a difference between isolating in a big house in Durham and isolating in a council flat in Ladbroke Grove. So that's why these things happen. There's don't have to be a magician to work it out. These are self-evident explanations. I've been up for a while. Call it a halt for now. Thank you very much. See you again next week. More than a while. Thanks very much.